The AFL began life as the VFL, or the Victorian Football League, back in 1897. The inaugural season featured 8 teams, all located in one state: Carlton Blues, Collingwood Magpies, Essendon Bombers, Fitzroy Lions, Geelong Cats, Melbourne Demons, South Melbourne Swans and St Kilda Saints, all of which are still a part of the AFL in 2019 in some shape or form. In 1908, the VFL expanded to 10 teams, with Richmond Tigers and University joining the league. While Richmond have gone on to become one of the biggest clubs in the AFL, University left the VFL just 6 years after they entered, finishing last in every season from 1911 to 1914, and losing 51 consecutive games. The VFL expanded again in 1925, with the addition of the Footscray Bulldogs, Hawthorn Hawks and North Melbourne Kangaroos, taking the total number of teams to 12. Incredibly, the league went unchanged for the next 57 years, but the 1980s and 90s saw a drastic period of change and evolution. In the early 80s, those in charge of the VFL were looking to expand outside of Victoria, and with many of the weaker teams struggling financially, change was needed. In 1982, South Melbourne relocated to Sydney in New South Wales. The Sydney Swans became the first non-Victorian team in the VFL. 5 years later, the interstate expansion continued with the addition of the West Coast Eagles from Western Australia and the Brisbane Bears from Queensland.
And the crowd down. The VFL hoping for about 20,000. I doubt that they've got it, despite perfect weather. Not a bad kick. Harris has done it. The Bears get their first goal in VFL football. And what a great start for them.
With 3 non-Victorian teams now in the league, the VFL changed its name to the AFL, Australian Football League, in 1990 to represent its more national status. Further expansion occurred in 1991, with the first team from South Australia, the Adelaide Crows, joining the AFL. 1992 saw a historic moment, with the West Coast Eagles becoming the first non-Victorian team to win the premiership. The Eagles had been a huge success since their inception in 1987, and as a result, the AFL decided to further expand with a second Western Australian team entering the league in 1995, the Fremantle Dockers. Naturally, a fierce rivalry developed between the two sides.
He could well be playing for his footy future.
Again, the tempers are flying, so the players are very, very close. Day will kick it, it's just thrown a couple. Look at this, Dennis.
This week, down goes Fletcher, claimed immediately, and we'll have a bounce, and again it's off. And God let one fly. Fletcher not amused either.
By 1996, many of the smaller Victorian clubs were still struggling financially, and with further expansion on the AFL's agenda, it was decided that a Victorian team must make way. Many possibilities were discussed, including a possible merger between Hawthorn and Melbourne, but this ultimately wouldn't pan out. It became clear the Fitzroy Lions would not be able to continue on its own, and at season's end, they merged with the Brisbane Bears to become the Brisbane Lions. The merger opened the gates for the Port Adelaide Power to join the AFL in 1997, the second team from South Australia following the Adelaide Crows in 1991. Much like the Eagles and Dockers 2 years earlier, a strong rivalry was born between the Crows and Power. The AFL saw no further expansion over the next decade. In the late 2000s, the AFL became interested in the idea of a second Queensland-based team, with the Gold Coast being the desired destination. Serious consideration was given to the idea of relocating North Melbourne to become the Gold Coast Kangaroos. North Melbourne insisted on staying in Victoria, however, so the AFL decided to create an entirely new expansion team, and in 2011, the Gold Coast Suns entered the league.
He fumbles, he gets around the opponent and runs in and kicks the first goal in the Gold Coast history.
The next year, the AFL expanded further into rugby league territory, with the Greater Western Sydney Giants becoming the second team in New South Wales. In 2019, the AFL consists of 18 teams located in 5 states across Australia. The Northern Territory, ACT and Tasmania are the only states or territories without their own team. Many believe that a Tasmanian team will enter the league over the next 5 to 10 years.